Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So every now and then, I like to do a little bit about history in terms of how race and class, just how Brazil became what it is. And as I talk a lot about race, inevitably that's going to lead back to discussions of how uh, descendants of Africans ended up in Brazil. So Brazil is generally known, I mean, not generally, I mean, it's just a fact. Brazil imported the most enslaved Africans of all the American countries. Um, I always say that Brazil imported anywhere between 4 and 5 million enslaved Africans. That's anywhere from 10 to 12 times as many enslaved Africans as were sent to the United States. So Black history is a big thing in Brazil, and I'd say it's only been in the last few decades, maybe the last 10 to 15 years, really, that because of the internet, so many Black Brazilians, or if you prefer, Black and brown Brazilians, have been getting access to how Brazil came about. For many years, people have denied the issue of race as one of the deciding factors into why it seems that Brazil is so segregated in terms of lines of race between poor, rich and poor, and the racial hierarchy that I always talk about that goes on. So today, I wanted to react to a video that I saw a few days ago. It's like a little cartoon that somebody put together, real short. Um, I don't think you can summarize the history of slavery and social racial inequality and history of Afro-Brazilians in just a minute and a half video, but it is a pretty good, just quick breakdown that it kind of explains why, in the last few decades, there's been this thing, a debate about the quota system, affirmative action policies in Brazil. Some people look at it as unnecessary, or, we don't have racism in Brazil, so, quotas are unfair. And these social inequalities came about because of the vast differences between the white population and the non-white population. So the video I want to react to today, I'm calling it "Brazil Freed the Enslaved, but Never Wanted to Resolve the Legacy of Slavery." That kind of says it all, in two short sentences. So before I get into this video, I want to request that you all like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, and click on the notification bell so that you know when I put up a new video. And with that said, let's explore this a little bit more. Okay, so here's a picture. This is a real picture of two enslaved Black people in Brazil. Let's talk a little bit about how social and racial inequalities came to, how did this happen in Brazil? I mean, I'm quite sure for those of you who live in the United States, many of you are familiar with a lot of aspects of American slavery, but, and really the African descendant situation needs to be compared and analyzed because so many countries in the Americas depended on enslaved African labor. So let's talk about this from the Brazilian perspective. As I stated early on, reports generally would say that Brazil received 4 to 5 million enslaved Africans. As the period of slavery was coming to an end towards the second half of the 19th century, Brazilian elites came up with the idea that says, well, let's replace this enslaved labor because slave revolts and the push for abolition was growing stronger and stronger with every passing decade. Elites and slave owners, abolitionists, they all knew it would only be a matter of time before slavery would come to an end in Brazil. So elites wanted to prepare for that. So instead of opening, liberating the enslaved Africans and their descendants and incorporating them into the new workforce, they decided to open up their gates for European immigration. Europeans coming from mostly places like Italy, and some came from Germany, some came from, Portugal, some came from Spain, some came from Germany. And to replace the slave labor, they wanted to use Europeans because not only did they want Europeans, because these people were looking for maybe a better life outside of the country that they were living in, but also because they wanted to whiten the country. I've always talked about the policy of embranquecimento. Not only did they want to whiten Brazil strictly numerically by bringing in millions it's funny because they, according to some reports, they opened their doors to like 4 million European immigrants. So it's almost like, okay, you brought in 4 to 5 million enslaved Africans, and then you replaced them towards the end of slavery. You open up the doors to about 4 million Europeans, almost like directly wanting to replace the enslaved. Um, so the Brazilian government provided subsidies for these Europeans to come into the country, but they also wanted them to mix with the black and brown population because towards the end of slavery, uh, the population in Brazil was pretty much like 2/3 black and brown, and they didn't like that. Their thing was, we can never be accepted on the world stage as a serious country with such a large non-white population. So they wanted to Europeanize the country. They wanted to increase the numbers of whites by bringing in 4 million European immigrants, but they also promoted the idea of mixing so that eventually within a few generations, they wanted the black and brown population to just disappear into whiteness. Of course, that didn't happen because there were just too many. And, this idea of embranquecimento, what they call whitening, would take a couple of generations for that to happen. And as I say, that's really we can say the blueprint for the Brazilian population that you see today. Abolition of slavery took place on May 13th of 1888. So then the question is, what happened on May 14th of 1888, the day after the abolition of slavery? So as I say, when you go back to that time, you come to see the origins of the vast social and racial inequalities that you have in Brazil today. So with that said, I want to check out this video. Check it out. It's just a short 1.5-minute video. I'm going to do an overdub for this so you can understand what the narrator is saying. Then I'm going to come back and offer my comments on it. After liberation, Black men and women were replaced on the plantations by European immigrants who came to Brazil for economic reasons and as part of a plan to whiten the population. Time passed and little changed. Prejudice meant that Black people continued to be treated as slaves in many regions. As a result, many of them moved to the cities where they found underemployment and lived in tenements or cortiços. This lasted until the government put an end to these tenements with sanitary laws that strengthened structural racism by the government itself. Then, expelled from their homes, Blacks and other lower class people began to create favelas or slums, and since their children and grandchildren didn't even have documents, they couldn't enroll in schools, which were also very far from where they lived. This made education even further away from them, not to mention that the past of the enslaved, including the places where they were born and the names and locations of their family members, were erased when the documents of slavery were destroyed by the government. This all started a cycle. The more racism grew, the more Black people were excluded from society, and the more racism grew. Brazil freed the enslaved, but never really wanted to resolve the legacy of slavery that we had here. As you have seen, the exclusion of Black people in our society was not resolved with the abolition of slavery. This problem has taken on new faces over time, but it has always existed in Brazil. Okay, so I hope you like that short comic, short cartoon. It didn't, like I said, you can't, even if you talk about just post-abolition period of Brazil, saying from 1888 to 2024, you can't really talk about all of that in just a short video, but it is a pretty good introduction. You can't get away from how social inequality started from the time Africans were enslaved to do the labor and basically build Brazil. So what I want to focus on now is some past articles that I've talked about this. I think it would be fascinating for anybody to just study the history of slavery in Brazil and the experience of Black Brazilians, both in the period of slavery and post-abolition. You say we're still in post-abolition now. So let me just go through a few articles that have touched upon this, over the last few years. He brought up again this idea of whitening the population. Of course, this is the famous picture that I refer to this picture often. It's called the Redenção de Cã, which means Ham's redemption, based on the biblical myth that said Ham was the originator of the Black race and he was cursed for that. He had dark skin. So to redeem this so-called curse of Black skin, the redeeming aspect was said to, well, if black people can whiten with the white population, they could be eventually become white. So that's what this painting from 1895 documents. Okay, you have the dark-skinned black grandmother. She had a child with a white man, producing a mixed girl, a mulatta, still black, but a mulatta. You have the European or Portuguese immigrant who the mulatta mixed and had a child with and produces the white or off-white baby. Okay. Again, the painting from 1895, which says that, let me see, intellectuals, artists, politicians, and writers who believed in white supremacy in Brazil, they preached that blacks could be eliminated from Brazil through intense mixing and massive European immigration. Brazil would then become an increasingly white country. That's what it's showing in this picture, this painting. And to this day, you still see a lot of this process going on with a lot of black and brown families in Brazil to this day. I did a story back in 2019 where this popular hairstylist, I think he's in Sao Paulo, he posted a picture on the Day of Black Consciousness. Popular black hairstylist celebrates the whitening of his family. People were asking, why would you post a picture like this on November 20th, the Day of Black Consciousness, where he showed his father, himself, his son, and then his granddaughter, from the very dark-skinned black man to a light, or you could say white-looking, girl. I mean, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of Brazilian families are in this process right now. Okay. That's what we say embranquecimento, or the whitening of the population. May 13th and May 14th, we're still in May. May is going to be done probably by the time I post this video, it might be already June. But today is May 30th. This is so every year on May 13th, people talk about, a lot of Black Brazilians are of the idea we should not be celebrating May 13th because we're still not free. But every May 13th, they still talk about what has changed. Actress Zize Malta talked about this in a post on her Instagram a few years ago. And she says the Golden Law, which freed all enslaved peoples in Brazil on May 13th in 1888, she says, is this a date to be celebrated? On May 13th, 1888, Princess Isabel, heir to the throne in Brazil, signed the Golden Law, which officially abolished slavery in the country. The princess and her achievement are revered in the history textbooks, and the date, the abolition of slavery, was instituted in the official calendar as something to be celebrated. But for the Black movement, there is nothing to celebrate. After much struggle by Black men and women in colonial Brazil, such as the Quilombo dos Palmares, the famed Maroon Society in northeastern Brazil, and the Mali's uprising. It was a revolt of Muslims in the state of Bahia. For example, the Golden Law came, but it came without any moral or economic reparation. It did not guarantee social inclusion. Many remained on the very plantation where they worked as slaves because they had nowhere else to go. Others, left to their own resources, became marginalized and discriminated against, initiating the evils we have fought into this day: discrimination, poverty, lack of opportunities, and decent work for the Black population. May 13th is another day of resistance and struggle for equality and against racism. So that's what Zize Malta had to say about the topic. Again, the topic: what happened to Black Brazilian women on May 14th, 1888, the day after the abolition of slavery? Okay, this is an article by Deisi Benedito. She's been in the struggle for a long time. May 14th would begin the perverse path of young and old Black men and women in Brazil, now in the condition of ex-slave. Many of the former slave masters found themselves still unhappy with the law that made slavery extinct throughout the national territory. Several lawmakers lobbied for the law to be revoked. In several states, security was reinforced, fearing looting and revenge against the slave masters. What else can we see? So talking about the condition of ex-slaves, they say they would become washerwomen, ironers, wet nurses, nannies, housekeepers, cooks, confectioners, housekeepers, and maids. For many, in exchange for a plate of food, a place of humiliating and unhealthy conditions to guarantee their survival, often far from their families. Okay, this was the Black Brazilian post-abolition. Then a lot of people talk about the Brazilian government subsidizing millions of Europeans to come into the country as slavery was coming to its end. So today, with 2 decades of affirmative action and people saying it's unfair, people seem to forget the unfaithful quota beneficiaries when affirmative action in Brazil only benefited white immigrants. This is a picture from 1911 a white family arriving in Caxias do Sul in the southern state of Rio Grande do Sul. Subsidized by the government, around 100 families of Italian farmers arrived in Pará, also in southern Brazil, in 1898. This is what that picture is. These are the three southern states of Brazil where many of the European immigrants ended up coming to. 80% of those three states' populations declare themselves white. I've said it over and over. This is a portion of Brazil that considers it to be like the European section of the country, where 80% of the people define themselves as white. And it was because of this European immigration where Brazil opens its borders to white immigrants, while simultaneously prohibiting any more Africans coming into the country. More Italian immigration into the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Okay. So just a little bit of background there. What else do we have here? As freedmen, blacks were still exploited as slaves. Even free, everyday blacks faced conditions that perpetuated slave relations. Okay, so this is the history of black slavery in Brazil. Let me see if we have any. I don't think we have any pictures here, but just the headline says it all. Freedmen, blacks still exploited as slaves. Okay, that's what the video was talking about. Then this Wikipedia article summarizes something that was very controversial: the burning of the slave archives in Brazil. It occurred on May 13th, 1898. I'm sorry, May 13th, 1891. Exactly 3 years after the end of slavery, by the Minister of Finance, his name was Rui Barbosa. So on December 14th, 1890, a document was signed by the ministry and announced the burning of all registries about the buying and selling of slaves in Brazil. This included, the books that kept these records. It included customs controls and taxes paid. The document also determined that the registries were sent to Rio de Janeiro, which was the capital of the country at the time. These documents were to be burned. They didn't want any records coming back that was talking about that could prove maybe in the future how Black people might be requesting reparation or anything. So they burned a lot of files that had to do with slavery in Brazil. And remember, slavery went on in Brazil for about 350 years. Brazil was the last country in the Americas to abolish slavery in 1888. The guy who was behind this is Rui Barbosa. So he was the Ministry of Finance in Brazil, and he ordered the burning of these documents so that you couldn't trace the history there. We saw a lot of pictures of slavery throughout this video. Most of the slavery pictures come out of this area between Sao Paulo state and Rio de Janeiro state. There's other pictures from Minas Gerais. Today, this region is known as the Paraíba Valley. It encompasses the regions in the state of Sao Paulo and in the state of Rio de Janeiro, and it stands out for concentrating a considerable portion of the Brazilian economy. Let me see here. So what does it say? The name is due to the fact that the region is part of the Paraíba do Sul river basin. Since this river extends from Sao Paulo and along almost the entire length of the state of Rio de Janeiro and a small southern part of the state of Minas Gerais. So anyway, just a quick video that's talking about the origins of why there's such wide disparities between the Black and white populations in Brazil today. So that's why I wanted to share this video today. Wanted to know what you thought about this today. Definitely drop a comment in the comment section. Like this video, share this video, consider subscribing to the channel. Click on the notification bell so that you'll know when I put up a new video. And with that said, I'm going to end this video here and request that you all come back, check out the next video that I post.